maybe prune, well, shouldn't prune past January 1st, January 30th, because vascular activity is beginning to happen, and whether you can see it or not. So you shouldn't be pruning in early spring. So late winter, or I mean late fall, early winter is probably your best compromise. If you're not in an area where sudden oak death and things like that are a problem, prune in the winter. As a compromise, you could also say, if you have to make cuts more than about 2 inches in diameter, you should only do that when the tree's dormant. If you can make cuts, if you need to make cuts that are smaller, like this size, on a coast live oak, you can do that pretty much anytime. Diseases in coast live oaks. I don't know whether, yeah, one of the pieces that was going to be, I guess, made available one way, electronically for you, or I have one copy here that somebody's welcome to. This, 4 pages, 2 sides, is a list of diseases and insects that attack oaks. And that's a lot of bugs. Out of that whole piece, there are probably only 3 or 4 things that you need to do anything about. In other words, just because a plant has an insect or has a disease, that doesn't mean you have to treat it. So don't let somebody come around and say, oh, we need to spray your trees 3 times a year. That's a nice con job. It's what keeps pest control companies in business, but you should only be putting chemicals out there if there's a reason to do it. You shouldn't be spending the money if you don't need to. This, for instance, is twig blight. Pest control companies will often scare people about this because there are dead leaves scattered in the bottom part of the tree. But take a close look, you'll notice they're only in the bottom of the canopy, in the lowest 1/3 of the canopy. They're in an area where there's less air movement, where it's shadier, and usually shaded by the upper part of the tree or by surrounding trees. It's in an area where there's not very vigorous foliage, and so the disease attacks that part of the tree. It will never kill a tree. If you want to control it, you can do that with a systemic fungicide in early spring, but you shouldn't feel obligated to do it unless it has really disfigured your tree, and it's the sort of thing your neighbors would say, what's wrong with your tree about, and maybe it's worth treating that. But recognize you have to treat it, if it's a fungus, you have to treat it as a preventive. Treating fungi that are already present is a fool's game. It doesn't work. It'll make you feel better because you paid to have somebody do something, but it's not going to help the tree. Fungi need to be prevented. They aren't very effectively stopped. So if you had twig blight really seriously in your coast live oak last year, you might want to be treating right now to prevent it from killing foliage this year. But you need to do it in early spring when the new foliage just emerges. You've got to protect the foliage from being infected. You can't wait until it's infected and then treat. In a really serious case of oak branch blight, a different disease, a tree can look like this. And for this, the twig blight, it just kills this season's twig. It'll be little clusters of dead leaves with about 1 or 2 inches long. The oak branch blight will kill branches up to the size of your thumb and 5 or 6 feet long. And again, that can be treated with a systemic fungicide, but it has to be done as a preventive. If you have a tree that looks like that, and you treat it right now, you could probably prevent infection of this season's leaves. If you wait until June, forget it. You've got to wait until next year to treat. You have to prevent infection of the current season foliage. You can't fix it once it's infected. That's intentionally black to tell me that we're on a different subject. Just go ahead. Support. The trees need posts. Well, you can see this one doesn't need that support. Lousy light, I apologize. Here, this gentleman has about 20 stakes around the tree, and his wife is saying, "Are you afraid it's going to blow away?" The point is that staking a tree is often done at the wrong time. If you're going to stake a tree, you should do it. Oh, next picture. You should do it when the tree is young, and recognize that by pruning, we have the ability to make a plant do almost anything we want it to do. These are trying to be, that's a DNR cedar, and that is a Ilex vomitoria, a holly species from Texas. So, in other words, you can do this if you want. It just costs a lot of time and money. Either your time equals money, or you're paying somebody. So don't think that this can't be done. I'm just saying that be aware of what you're getting into before you start something like this. Or this is an exaggeration, obviously. I'm just saying that if you are trying to make a plant into a form that's totally foreign for it, don't be surprised if it's either a lot of work or not very successful. Here a gardener really needed a job, I guess. If this was supposed to be a mass of shrubs, it would have been fairly easy to take care of. But imagine how much time it takes to prune those. If you're going to grow California native plants, don't do this. Our natives don't lend themselves to this kind of pruning well at all. And I'm not saying you can't prune a coast live oak into a hedge, but it's going to be a very dense canopy that's going to be an invitation to insects and diseases. And it's going to have those pests right here in front of you on your hedge. It's not going to be like a large tree. You can prune ceanothus into a hedge, but they are going to have a short life. You can prune Arctostaphylos densiflora Howard McMinn into a hedge, but there is an insect I bet most of you have never seen. It's a woolly aphid that attacks manzanitas, but only when they're very dense and the natural predators can't get into the middle of them. So you can make plants do these things, but remember, you're making something that is totally unnatural, and you've got to be prepared to accept the consequences. See the leaf notching here, the edges having been eaten? That's caused by fruit tree leaf roller. And these are if you have oaks, if you live with oaks, I bet you've seen these. They're a little green worm about 1 inch long that hangs on a silver thread. And yeah, I see a lot of nodding heads. It's not an oak worm. It is here for only 6 weeks per year in spring. It's only feeding for 2 weeks a year. Now, if you're going to prevent this, you've got to be there in the first 2 weeks right after the eggs hatch. Otherwise, you're just killing insects that have already done their eating. They only eat for the first 2 weeks. After that, they just hang around and become a nuisance. They're not much fun in the champagne glass. So don't have a wedding under an oak tree in the spring. But the fact remains, in the worst year, at Stanford, and about 10 years ago, they completely stripped the oaks all along one of the main streets. And everybody was in panic. Within 2 months, the trees were completely covered with new foliage. In other words, this is an insect that has only, its mouth parts are so small, it can only eat juvenile foliage. This, what happened here, is it fed on the foliage when it was young like that, then this leaf grew out into this abnormal curled form, but they only feed on the juvenile foliage. Their mouth parts aren't large enough to feed on mature foliage. They just can't do a lot of harm. And if somebody comes around and says, oh, we've got a spray for those, just remember that they're only going to be there 6 weeks total, only feeding for 2 weeks. And if you're planning on having a party under an oak in the spring, you probably ought to have it sprayed. But if you can tolerate this life pattern, don't worry about it. It won't hurt the oak tree. You can do almost anything with coast live oak. That's coast live oak. It hasn't looked that good for a lot of years, but it looked good then. This is coast live oak, an excellent street tree, but of course, remember it's going to be about at least 40 feet by 40 feet eventually. These are valley oaks, and this is valley oak in its favorite environment. Notice the stream here. What happens with valley oaks is the acorns fall, they're carried by a stream, and as the water goes down, it leaves the acorns at the top of the bank. And if you go through the Sacramento Valley, you see them in this kind of a location all the time. And what that tells you is valley oak, Quercus lobata, and that's the foliage, likes a place where it can put roots, what are called sinker roots, down into a water table and draw water, even if there's no water up here. Sinker roots are a device that many trees, or most trees, will use if there's water underground. Parts of Palo Alto, especially near Willow Road, there's an underground water table at about 20 feet. And as a result, many of the oaks there or many plants there grow fine with very little water. The reason is that they produce these buttress roots that we talked about, and when the root is about 3 to 4 or 5 feet away from the trunk, and if there's water down, or permanent water down below, they'll send a root straight down from these buttress roots. And so if one of these is removed, you find they've got these spikes, maybe 6 or 8 of them, that go straight down into water. But that only happens where there's water available. In many cases, you'll find redwoods doing very well in places they shouldn't. But if you check the geology, you'll find there's water down below, and they've tapped into it. Yes, ma'am.
Typically, what is the water, do you know what the level of the water table is here in these areas, the peninsula?
Right here I don't. Okay. I know there are microsites in Palo Alto where the water is only 3 feet below grade, which is a whole different problem, especially if you have a basement. If you can ask engineering companies about water tables, or sometimes I bet the city of Palo Alto knows too. If you were in Palo Alto, let's see. I have a plant about 2 miles from here that has water at about 11 feet below grade. Yes. Next picture. This is blue oak. This is one of the other major oak species. You wouldn't have it right here. Blue oak is a strange bird that chooses hilltops. This is a typical situation.